Welcome back to the session 2. The first speaker in session 2 is Professor Lin Zhixiu. His topic is Bioactive Nitro Compounds against the human coronavirus, a review and perspective. This is the paper published in China Pharmacology, English version. Professor Lin in 1983 graduated from the Guangzhou Institute of TCM. After working in Guangzhou for a couple of years, he was learning in UK and achieved a PhD degree in UCL, in University of King's College of London. Later on in London, Professor Lin was learning in Middlesex University, was doing research there. After backing from UK, he was teaching at Macau, and later on he moved to Hong Kong and climbing the ladder from assistant professor to full-time professor now. He is the director of TCM Institute of the Chinese University of Hong Kong. He has the sufficient researching experience in the TCM's treatment to the skin diseases. He is also specialized in the systematic assessment to the common disease and how to use TCM to treat them. This is another expertise of his research. In the clinical study, he achieved a lot of results and achievements. He published 190 papers, theses or papers or reviews. Among them, over 60 are SCI core papers. Now let's welcome Professor Lin.
All right. Okay, thank you, Professor Feng, for your kind introduction. Of course, I also want to thank Professor Huazhong for his kind invitation for me to talk on this topic. Since my PPT is in English, so I think I better do it with English, okay? And my talk today is about bioactive natural compounds against human coronaviruses. And this basically is a review, so it's not my group's original work. So I put the things in perspective first. Now, we are all living under the shadow of COVID-19 pandemic right now. As of 11 August 2020, there had been almost 20 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, including over 700,000 deaths reported to WHO. So we all know COVID-19 really get us upside down, get our life upside down. Now, we need to look at the pathogenesis of this COVID-19. So we know we do understand right now, and the coronavirus, short for COV, is the causative pathogen for COVID-19. So what sort of virus is this? Now, coronavirus is a large family of RNA viruses, and it has a single-strand positive sense RNA genome. And of course, you need to grow and replicate inside the host cells. And coronavirus can cause many respiratory infectious diseases, such as SARS, as we had seen in 2002 to 2003, and of course Middle East respiratory syndrome, as we have seen in 2012, and currently COVID-19. To be exact, SARS-CoV-2 is the pathogenic genesis of COVID-19. That's the causative virus for COVID-19. So this basically is a very, I think, is fundamental to our understanding of COVID-19. Now, also to understand the life cycle of a coronavirus is of course very important for us if we want to develop antiviral, anti-cough medication. So I just present this in a single slide here. So the coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 infection actually is initiated by the binding of viron into the receptor. I don't have the mouse here. Now, okay, you can see here. Okay, now the binding of this virus to the receptor and then fused with the membrane, the cellular membrane, and then of course go into the cell, and where you can release the RNA, the genomic RNA into the cytoplasm. The next step for the is the replication of the virus genome, and also the of course the transcription and the replication of various important proteins, like the structure protein, as you can see here, spike protein, S protein, membrane M protein, and envelope E protein, and also of course N for nuclear capsid protein. Now all these proteins actually then move to ER and Tongji compartment, where you do all the assembly and to form the mature viron. And of course the viron with viscous, and then of course all these things are fused with the cell membrane again to release the mature virus. So that's complete life cycle of coronavirus. So if we understand the life cycle of this coronavirus, we know actually there are several targets we can aim to, like the binding site, and also the replication and transcription of the proteins, and of course assembly. This is another site for drug treatment. Just briefly talk about the symptoms of COVID-19. Of course, COVID-19 actually can be deadly. So you can cause fever, cause fatigue, and cause cough. Mostly, the COVID-19 actually causes respiratory symptoms like sneezing, runny nose, sore throat, dry cough, and shortness of breath. And apart from the respiratory symptom, of course, you can also cause a wide range of other symptoms like the decreased kidney function and diarrhea, and also of course cause decreased white blood cells. So hence the body's immune function is very much impaired. Now this is a typical CT, the chest CT radiography. So the characteristic is the consolidative opacity. In Chinese we say 個肺咧就花咗. And nowadays COVID-19 can be diagnosed by either chest CT radiographer and together with clinical symptoms. Of course, RT-PCR is actually for biological and biochemical diagnosis. Until now, no specific antivirus drugs are available to combat this disease. Vaccines are more or less on the pipeline. Of course, there are a lot of controversy about the emerging vaccine, like the vaccine from Russia, because we don't know whether it's effective or not. And recently, of course, a vaccine from Wuhan Research Institute, I think the Biological Research Institute, and also is on the pipeline. I think it should come very soon. But the effectiveness of this vaccine against the SARS-CoV-2 virus actually is yet to be known. For current conventional treatment strategy for COVID-19, actually, of course, when someone has breathing difficulty, you need to give them oxygen therapy. And of course, we can use antibiotic, And antivirus, of course, it should be the main treatment. So current antiviral agents are remdesivir. Of course, we also have interferon. But of course, all these actually we know now actually they are not very effective. To suppress the immune response, of course, we need to sometimes we give the patient corticosteroids, and of course, and the convalescent plasma. It could be a very effective treatment strategy, but of course, it's very difficult to get all these convalescent plasma from the cured patient. And we now absolutely know chloroquine, hydrochloroquine are not effective at all for COVID-19. Just opposite to President Donald Trump's suggestion, hydrochloroquine should be used for treatment of COVID-19. So the answer is actually is no. So both antibiotic and antivirus have a quite severe side effect if you don't use it properly. And in fact, if the dose actually too large, certainly it's going to bring a lot of side effect. So the efficacy is another issue. So safety, of course, is certainly need to bring into someone's mind. Now, extensive studies have been conducted in the past several decades in order to identify antiviral natural products or Chinese medicine. So as a review, I list a lot of natural products here. The font size a little bit too small. For example, here I use Chinese gan cao dian su from, of course, from Chinese herbal medicine gan cao. Ren Shen Zhao Gang, Rensenoside, RB1, of course, very famous for a lot of pharmacological research. And then we also have something like the Imodium, Da Huang Su, actually from Chinese herb, Da Huang. And then, of course, another very famous Chinese herbal medicine is called Dang Shen. Actually, Dang Shen has quite a number of antivirus agents like Tenxinison, Tenxinong 1 and to 7, Dang Shen Tong. And of course, the other thing like Huang Qin, where we can get the Scadolarine, Huang Qin Su. And all these actually have anti-SARS-CoV activity, also anti-SARS-CoV-2 activity. The other thing like the theoflavin, Cha Huang Su, of course, from Chinese Hong Cha, black tea. And another, of course, Bolei tea also has this compound as well. That's why you read some recent news, actually, people, some experts recommend people to consume Bolei, Pu'er Cha, in order to combat this COVID-19. Now, the other compound, like Huazhong, from Chinese medicine, Huazhong is Baililuchun, resveratrol, actually have anti-MERS-CoV activity. And then others, dihydrotensionol, also have a MERS activity. Now, the last two actually are also important, like Cyclosapanin, B2, Cai Hu Zhao Gang B2. And also the Fangjijian, Tetrandrin. These actually have anti-CoV229E and also OC43. And all these two viruses actually can cause common cold. So Chinese all these natural products from Chinese medicine actually, as we know now, actually have anti-virus activity. And you will see the IC50 value on the right-hand side. Due to time constraint, I'm not going through it. Now, for the therapeutic of coronaviruses, as I said before, actually there are several targets we can aim to. The first one, of course, we can aim the structure protein, like S protein, N protein, M protein, and E protein, this here. And also there's some non-structured protein like the 3CL protein, PL protein, helicase H protein, and RDRP protein. So because for the virus to replicate, they need these proteins. So if we can inhibit this protein, of course, we can stop the replication of virus. Okay, so here basically is the size for the treatment for the target, the therapeutic target. Now here I do the summary here. So for a therapeutic target of a natural product against cough, then we have basically two targets. One is the target cell membrane. Here we have emodin, 大黄素, and 人参皂苷 RB2, RB1, and sagosapanin and B2, and these actually target on the receptor, basically the cell receptor here. So if you can block the receptor, of course, the cell cannot go into the virus cannot go to the cell. The other, of course, we do it through inhibition of viral replication. Here we have a lot of compound here, like cholesterol, and quercetin, tensionol 1, and of course all these actually aim for 3CL protein and PL protein, and theophlavin they actually aim for RDPR protein, and the others like the myritin and 野黄连素 scatolarin, basically it target on the H protein, and resveratrol aims for N protein. So you see, this basically gives a good summary about the therapeutic targets of all these natural products against cough, especially SARS-CoV and also SARS-CoV-2. In the long history of Chinese medicine, a lot of herbal formula have been used for the treatment of so-called 疫症, so epidemic diseases like our influenza, like SARS, etc. So I list all commonly used herbal formula for the treatment of this epidemic disease. For example, the 黄连清瘟胶囊, so 人参败毒散, 清肺解毒汤, 金花清感胶囊, 颗粒, 疏风解毒胶囊, 血必净, 这个注射液, injection fluid, and 麻杏石甘汤. This 麻杏石甘 decoction, of course, by far is most famous formula for the treatment of respiratory symptoms, because this actually, as we say, is a classical formula from Zhang Zhong. 双黄连胶囊, and also, of course, 连翘, 银翘散. 银翘散, of course, is by far the most commonly prescribed Chinese herbal formula for the treatment of cold and flu in Chinese medicine practice. Now, all these Chinese herbal formulas actually have anti-SARS-CoV and anti-COVID-19 activity. So I will expand a little bit, and because 黄连莲花清瘟胶囊 capsule is the most studied formula for recent years. As we have already learned from academician Wu Yiling, I think he showed this slide as well, but he didn't go into detail of this slide. Now, 莲花清瘟 capsule actually significantly inhibit the SARS-CoV-2 replication. So if you look at the right up corner, you see there's inhibition there. So the IC50 is just over 400 microgram per mil, and of course you can affect the virus morphology And another significant thing is about the anti-inflammatory activity of this Lianhua Qingwen capsule. So if you see, because the font size is too small, now you can inhibit the interferon alpha, gamma here, and of course, and also inhibit IL-6 and also other inflammatory cytokine release. Now, of course, this is an in vitro study on the viral cells. Now, I think I'm very impressed by the fact that Professor Yang, who gave a talk today, and of course Professor Zhong team, actually, apart from the in vitro study, they also did some clinical trials, so on 284 patients. Now, I just quickly go through this. So, Lianhua Qingwen capsule actually can exert a higher overall recovery rate than the control. So, if you see, so it's a 91.5% versus 82.4%. So that is a significant difference. And then we also see the Lianhua Qingwen capsules actually can release the symptom, cause the symptom recovery actually quicker than the control group. So if you see that, that's 7 days. The blue line is 7 days versus 10 days. So you see the two graphs here. The left-hand side actually is overall analysis. The right-hand side is per protocol analysis. So it's just slightly different here. Now, of course, you can also have a shorter time to recover of fever. So it's 2 days versus 3 days. Fatigue, 3 days versus 6 days. And then, of course, we have this coughing 7 days versus 10 days. So, in a way, actually, it's a quite significant result here. So, Lianhua Qingwen Jiaonang actually is good for COVID-19. But one thing surprised me is that there is no between group difference in the rate of conversion to severe cases or virus assay finding. I suppose this compound formula actually is work holistically towards the patient rather than only antivirus effect here. Now, given that there are a lot of similarity between SARS-CoV-2 and SARS-CoV, so it's rational to repurpose the natural products and Chinese herbal medicine and with anti-SARS-CoV or MERS-CoV for the treatment of COVID-19 because there are quite a lot of similarity between all these viruses. We're talking about 82% similarity of sequence identity and also 90% similarity of sequence identity in several key enzymes. So if you see the research on SARS, maybe you can more or less translate into the COVID-19. Now, here's the kind of conclusion. So, of course, these coronavirus can cause respiratory disease. Some of them are fatal, like SARS, MERS, COVID-19. And natural products, some of the natural products can have a very strong antiviral and anti-inflammatory actions. So that's why we can use them for the treatment of COVID-19. Now, in the future, I think in-depth in vivo study and pharmacokinetic studies, or PKs, could be conducted on natural product. So because if you want to develop this thing, of course, you need to really do some PK study. Now, the key thing is still clinical trial. Just like Professor Zhong group, they have done a clinical trial on Lianhua Qingwen capsule. So maybe in the future, other Chinese herbal medicine or maybe natural product can be also going through the same thing. Hopefully, we can finally develop an effective treatment for COVID-19 from natural product. Now, the content of my talk actually has been published in this review paper. Basically, what I'm doing now is actually to recite the information from this publication. So if you are interested in this, then of course you can find it from the Actor Pharmaceutical Syndicate B. Of course, now it has, I think, imperfect just over 7. Now, I need to thank a lot of people here. Now, for this review, Professor Kevin Xu is the mastermind of this review, and Professor Xian Yanfang and Dr. Zhang Jun, my postdoc fellow, and also Dr. Zhang Zhenbiao, my first postdoc fellow, doing all the research and also the draft manuscript. Professor Bin and Zhong from曙光University, and Professor Bin, of course, from Baptist U, and they provide critical comment on the manuscript. I'm doing all the talking today. Okay, and with that, that's all the time I have for today. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much for Professor Lin's excellent presentation. So now maybe we just have one question.
Q&A. We have time to take one question only. Let me check if there is question online. Not. Oh, there are a couple of questions. First question: different strains of virus. What's the difference of them? Why this new strain is more infectious? Because this is not my expertise. Basically, what I can say is that because those viruses, they share the same some similarities, and the gene sequencing shows 82% of the similarity with SARS. Most of the enzymes in those viruses shares over 90% of similarity in terms of the homology. So if some treatment is effective to SARS, especially the TCM natural compounds and the TCM formulas, we assume it could be effective more or less to this COVID-19. In specific, why there is the difference, or what the difference is in the treatment of those different strains, because I'm not an expert in this aspect, so I can't answer you. As the interest of time, I can only take this one question and pass our floor to the next one. Professor Li Hua from Huazhong University of Science and Technology. He will share with us the TCM compound treatment to COVID and the target researches. I will give some words about Professor Li Hua. Li Hua is the director of School of Pharmacy at Tongji Medical College, and also he is also working as the director for the Shenyang Medical University Innovative College. He is the vice chairman of the Association of the Pharmacology of China. He is also in charge of the subcommittee of the quality control and holistic assessment of drugs. And he is the expert of a lot of the professional organizations. In Hubei province, he is the chair of the Hubei Association of Pharmacology. Until now, he has in charge of the national research project, 3 of them, and one of them is the 5th plan of the city, of the state. And he published 15 publications on SCL level. Most of his publications is on science and the journal at the same level, and also the pharmaceutical journal and the Journal of Experimental Clinical Consultation, and also the Journal of Medicine, Chemistry, and Pharmacological Research, and the Frontiers, European Journal of Medical Chemistry, and a lot of the similar journals at this kind of the level. And at home and abroad, he gave a lot of lectures and presentations, has 2 patents. As the second author, he is the author of 2 textbooks for university students. So let's welcome Professor Li Hua to give us the speech. Thanks very much for Professor Lin and the host today. I'm going to talk with you the TCM component treatment to the COVID-19 and the target research. Two parts for today. First, the virtual drug screening based on COVID-19 treatment. Second, the study on the components of TCM for anti-inflammatory storm. As we all know, COVID-19 is hitting the world. The epicenter is really global. It contains various strains and cause a lot of syndromes. One of the major ones is pneumonia. The transmission methods are mainly droplet and touches and fecal oral transmission. And S protein is the major accessible points for us to intervene. It's one of the major targets. 3CL-prone and PL-prone are RDRP. These three kinds of the enzyme are playing kind of the important role in the life cycle of this virus. Because of that, that is quite a potential target for the future treatment. It's really challenging us. There is no effective cure for COVID-19. So basically, our methodology is to just give a throw to the kitchen sink and just say what is working for among the available treatment. So there are a lot of the treating methods for the COVID-19, like the remdesivir. A lot of them has been tested by the laboratory studies and the clinical trials. But so far, there is no one yield a very satisfactory result. And many other chemical components or chemical drugs has been used. So some of them has the kind of the satisfactory result. Traditional medicine is also being deployed to treat this COVID-19. Qing-Fei-Pai-Du-Tang capsule is one of the major ones that has been approved by the Chinese FDA that can be used to treat some syndromes and symptoms of the COVID-19. And for some single herbs like Jingyinghua and Huangqing and Chenpi tangerine pills and stuff like that or can be used. So our research is concentrating on the components or the substance of those herbs. And we start from those targets and study the genomes. And once we know sufficiently about the genome and knowing the target that we need to attack, and we screen the kind of the potential substitutes. And then we study the active contents of those small molecules. By doing this, we could speed up the R&D of the new drugs, so that can really help the screening speed, so we can select the most effective or the most potential components in the future treatment or in the possible drugs. So my first part is about the screening of the drugs based on the targeting research of the COVID-19. I just published this paper on the Chinese journal, but it's an English version. It's been cited so far 300 times. And at that time, when I was publishing that paper, we don't have a full picture of the protein profile of COVID-19. At that time, we do the computational analysis and the profiling of the COVID-19 virus. First, we do the biological information processing. We realized that this COVID-19 evolved from those bat virus or virus related to bats. Like it enjoys 93 similarity with bat COVID TG13. In all the human virus, the largest similarity goes to SARS virus. So the gene sequencing is quite similar, even the same thing, over 80% of the gene similarity with the human SARS virus. Because of that, because of those biological data, we analyzed all of those codings of the virus protein. By doing this, we was planning to select some proteins and enzymes that could serve as the target for the future treatment. Through our modeling, we built 19 models and 1 human host protein structure. So simply, we just make a simulation of the real host environment for the virus. Because we have the emergency to make the effective treatment, so we use our model to compare it with other models, and we figured out the RMSD enjoys very high similarity. So the differences is only 0.126A. So this kind of the discrepancy is not material, so we can really trust this homology modeling. By this model, we select a group of those proteins that can be potentially serve as the targets. Our lab set up the database for TCM and natural compounds. It includes those effective contents for antivirus, anti-inflammatory, and antibacterial. So in total, we have 78 natural compounds. Currently, we are doing experiments or the clinical trials for those targets. Some of them are structural protein, like the ICE protein and the N protein. There are some non-structural protein. They are mainly enzymes like PL-Pro and 3PL-Pro and RARB and helicase. And some of them are human protein, like the ACE2 and TMPRSS2. And some of those kind of the protein exist in the human host, ACE2, the ACE2 TMPRSS2. After the modeling and assembling of the virus, this kind of the human enzyme or protein is required to insert it in the previous virus in order to release from the previous cell and form its own membranes. I want to talk about the PL-Pro. PL-Pro enjoys the very high affinity with the other, with some antivirus, antibacterial virus, like EGC9, and some antibacterial drugs like Nobinavir and Stramine. After the lockdown of the epicenter of Wuhan, by July, all of our researchers started to come back to the laboratory. We just did this research in the past 1 month. So we did some verification for the screening result. I haven't put the chemical components here. I just let you know the inhibiting function of PL-Pro, and just let you know there are some natural compounds that has the inhibiting effects to the virus. But we haven't done the very thorough research yet. And now it's another kind of RDRP. RDRP also has the very high affinity with some of the TCM compounds, like the transylene compounds, and the baclobuviir, like the antivirus, and the remdesivir. We found it could inhibit RDRP production. It also can inhibit the human host cell formation. So furthermore, it could inhibit the forming of TMRPSS2 enzyme in order to prevent or cut the membranes of the two cells to get together. But we still need more work to do to let us know the expression of this enzyme and how it works in between of them. And the another target that is quite promising is 3CL-Pro. This one, we screened that there are some antivirus, some antibacterial drugs, and some drugs used for coughing can also work. And in TCM and the natural compounds like the botulinum and the Qing-Fei-Pai-Du-Tang can also be used. And the baclobuvir, this kind of the antivirus drug, has the very high affinity with the 3CL-Pro. And the Shanghai Pharmaceutical Research Institutes, they selected the Huangqinggan and Huangqingsu. Two of them shows the very obvious inhibiting effects on against the COVID-19 at the very low density, like 10.27 and 1.69 respectively. Even with this kind of the density, it could show the inhibiting effects. So it is a non-covalent and a non-peptide enzyme. This kind of the research result has been published by Bioactive, and we did a lot of this kind of the research and on the assessment of the activity of the enzyme. Because this kind of the study haven't been published, so I just let you know the numbers but not the exact name of this enzyme. You see here are 6 charts from 1 to 6. There is a very general trend that all of them has the kind of the inhibiting effects against the forming of the protein enzyme. In one of them has showed the very strong inhibiting effects to the human COVID-19. So I can simply say the potential is very promising. Later on, we will move those trials to P3 laboratories and conduct further on the effectiveness of this virus. But now, probably, some of the stuff of the research is on holiday, so we cannot get the latest information. So another target is spike protein. Spike protein has the high affinity with the Chinese compounds and the products. It's worth mentioning that Qing-Fei-Pai-Du-Tang can really inhibit the interference. Can really take the space between the virus and the host cells. So potentially it could prevent the replication of the virus. In the first generation of the SARS research, we did some experiments that proves that Qing-Fei-Pai-Du-Tang is really working in preventing the virus getting into the host cell. So furthermore, I think if Qing-Fei-Pai-Du-Tang can use for the stopping of the transmission of COVID-19, it requires further more studies. So here is some researches that been published on Nature. It's screened from 250,000 kinds of the TCM, and some of them has been found that effective in stopping the transmission or inhibiting the replication of this COVID-19 virus. But this article just tell you how to screen, but it doesn't get into further the mechanism behind the replication and the inhibiting effects of those virus. Previously, this Huazhong Qing-A has been studied on other science publications. It proves that the Huazhong Qing-A is effective in fighting against Ebola by blocking some molecular channels in order to by blocking the Caucasian molecular channel. That means just simply block the channel between one cell to another cell. This is kind of the necessity between the connection and the replication of the virus. So that's simply break the transmission chain of the virus. I think this research has moved to the stage of the rat trial. In the fighting with the Ebola virus, it shows 90% of the rats survived from the infection of the virus by the treatment of Huazhong Qing-A. So, potentially, Huazhong Qing-A can be used in the inhibiting of the COVID-19 virus, and it may refer to there are some common ground in the mechanism of COVID-19 with Ebola. Now, after the publishing of the previous article on the COVID-19 targeting treatment, we just figured out a furin protein enzyme that can be served as the new targets in treatment of the COVID-19 through analyzing some coronavirus, especially those highly infectious virus, and compared the generation 1 SARS virus. We found the ICE protein or spike protein. At this point, the COVID-19 virus has a new sequence named TMPRSS2. After biological analysis, we found it's highly possible it is the insertion place of the enzyme of furin. Furin protease has been discovered and widely recognized the effectiveness of this. In April this year, Nature journal reported this new discovery of the furin protease. So turn a page. Now, because we already know the structure of furin structure, and we did some screening, and we figured out some FDA-approved drugs and the TCM and the natural compound like EGCG and Jin-Yin-Hua and Chuan-Xin-Lian and the derivative of this. Please turn a page. So, connecting with this furin, and there are some antivirus drugs. So after the June, we got the chance to verify the affinity of this furin protein. So here I'm showing you 4 charts. One of them is about the insertion targets and the gene targets. RAR originally is kind of the variation of the furin enzyme insertion. RNA sequencing, we found that the activity is even better than the other one, and the responses rate is even higher. Last, we did the screening and it proves that the nitro compound, one chemical compound, IC50, shows very high value, and we did the dynamic research. We found it is a competitive inhibitor, so it does not change the maximized reaction speed, but it could increase some other indicators, so it's kind of the competitive inhibitor. Okay, I'm talking about the anti-inflammatory storm and the TCM to treat it. As we all know, COVID-19 could lead to anti-inflammatory cell and cell factor storm, and possibly it could lead to the high mortality rate. So normally IL is being widely used in treating this kind of the storm, but probably you know the side effects is the damaging of the bone system of the body. To prevention the inflammatory storm, there are a lot of available Chinese formulas. It's kind of the strength of TCM. 比如说 Qing-Kai-Ling decoctions and Huanglian detoxifying decoctions, all of them shows certain functions in these aspects. So we just skipped the PPT. Here, I want to talk about our recent endeavors, that is the small molecular TNF-alpha inhibitor. How we discovered this? We screened 6 million chemical compounds, and we select this one, and the inhibiting effect is very high and very sound. The major function of this is to inhibiting RPF-induced inflammatory storm. Simply, it is the acute pneumonia. If we don't give the treatment, only 20% surviving rate. With the treatment, 6% of surviving rate with the rats. So you can see, obviously, it's quite effective. Previously, we did some research on Qianjingzi, a TCM herb. We isolated CLX006. It has the very high activity to anti the inflammatory. So it has a lot of the in vivo and in vitro anti-infectious activity. And when we did the laboratory research in the laboratory with the cell, and it's been proved that some signal channels can work well in the anti-inflammatory works. And we did some in vivo experiments. So we draw the conclusion that it could prevent a lot in the LPM-induced lung damages. Obviously, it could reduce the mortality of the rats and protect the lung and the kidney function. Baijie and Baijie ILS6 is one of the etiology of the COVID-19. So when we realize the significance of it and discover this, we can use the Qianjingzi or substance from Qianjingzi to prevent the release of IL-6. Probably it could lead to a very effective treatment to prevent the cell factor storm. The other effective substance comes from the Chuan-Xinlian. There are a lot of the drugs based on the androglycolate, and some of those drugs developed from this herb is very mature and widely available in the market in the treatment of flu and fever. Now we just studied the active substance of this Chuanxinlian to study the activity of that. Later on, we did the chemical derivative and the structure research to test its anti-inflammatory activities, and finally we get the maximized IM chemical. It could release a huge amount of the active substance. The IC50, the indicator of the indicator of these activities, we did some research in these aspects. This is another series of study. We did a re-sequencing of the IM1 sigma and IL6. Another major research we did made it clear that how Chuanxinlian can inhibit the expressing of the certain virus from the cell. This inhibiting effects could block a signal channel and prevent the cell expression. The other blocking effect is to prevent the HK2 expressing. Some inflammatory cells requires a strong energy, and that may use some enzyme to trigger the reactions and to release extra energy to help the inflammatory reaction. So HK2 has been regarded as the target of anti-inflammatory. As I can recall, there is another publication recently that is not a research on specific HK2, but it is a deoxified HK2, and it proves that it can also be used in the inhibiting of the cell factor storm and inflammatory storm in the treatment of COVID-19. So we found that these derivatives can prevent the production of the cell production that induced by infection. And HH and HK2 has very strong connectivity. And using the basic trial of metabolism, it shows that after being treated for 4 hours, the effect showed up. So this anti-inflammatory is related to this target. Thanks very much, Professor Zhou. Thanks for your very nice speech.
The next speaker is Professor Zhang Wei. He is the Chief Respiratory Specialist at Shanghai曙光Hospital. Before I give him the microphone, let me give you a brief introduction of him. He is the Chief Respiratory Specialist at the曙光Hospital. He is also a member of the National and Shanghai Chinese Medicine COVID Treatment Expert Group and a member of the Shanghai COVID Treatment Expert Team. And he was involved in the treatment plan of the COVID, the national plan on treating COVID. He is also the director and chief physician of Department of Pulmonary Disease at Huazhong Hospital. And he is truly a very experienced specialist in this field. And today, he will share with us his clinical research on the use of TCM in treating COVID-19. Welcome, Professor. Hi, everyone. My topic today is the clinical research on the use of TCM in treating COVID-19. Let's move on to the next page. We can skip through this page as well, because I was one of the members in the team that drafted the treatment plan. So based on our research, we made some amendment to our integrative treatment plan. So basically, this is my brief report of how we fought the disease. So let's move on to the next few pages. So in Shanghai, we were very concentrated in our consolidated our effort in treating and the control of the pandemic. So we really consolidated and gathered all of our resources. So this is the picture. You see that our specialists, both from Chinese medicine and Western medicine, to come together and make hospital rounds. So basically, we see all the doctors in the conference room and watching the video and giving supervision and instruction. So this is we have in Shanghai City a lot of specialists come together and reached a COVID-19 expert consensus on the comprehensive treatment of viral diseases using integrative Chinese and Western medicine treatment plan. So you can actually find these article online. So this is our expert consensus. If you're interested, you can go online and find it. Let's go back. Let's go to the next one. Next one. So you can see here two versions of the TMC treatment plan for COVID-19. The first one was state-made, and the second version had some amendment by the Shanghai doctors, Shanghai specialists. So based on the two versions of the treatment plans, we published an expert consensus on the integrative treatment of COVID-19, and these are from Shanghai experts. So we made a lot of additional explanations and information based on what we had in Shanghai. So this is just some of the backgrounds and some of the major documents we had generated from our research. So obviously, what does our treatment plan entail? First of all, we have to evaluate the patient's symptoms. First of all, we have to observe how they're doing. And then we also have to give them a three-pronged treatment plan that involves nutrition and antivirals, which we don't really have a very effective drug for antivirals. And the third one is TCM, which not only treat the symptoms but also give nutrition support to the patients. So basically, after evaluation, this is the treatment plan we present to the patients. So there are 6 elements in the TCM treatment plan that we involves. First of all, it's temperature control, because you can use steroids, Western medicine to control temperature, but sometimes we can have bad side effects if we use Western medicine, so we prefer using TCM. The second element is digestive tract protection. And the third one is respiratory tract symptoms. And also multiple organ injuries, because this is also something that Western medicine may have side effects on, especially on the liver. Now, using TCM, we can protect the liver and other organs. And other the 驱邪 therapy, which means to expel the toxins, expel the pathogens from the body. And the Fuzhong therapy, which means we foster good qi and we enhance immunity. So 驱邪 and Fuzhong really complement each other in terms of treating the symptoms and foster immunity. So basically, we look at all the elements for the treatment for each patient. So based on this plan, we also have to look at what the testing results, because we see there's a phenomenon of some people will have negative results and then positive again and back and forth. So we use TCM to treat the patient so that we can actually turn the results into a negative for these patients without having them to be reinfected. So we both look at the throat swab result and the stool sample result. So I think there are TCM drugs that we can have a negative result as soon as 3 days. So in Shanghai, we had about 340 cases, and so to treat them in Shanghai, we use the 3-formula 3-drug plan. So for 3 formulas, the first one is to clear lungs, Tongfu. So that has to clear their lungs, so we can have very good effects on body temperature control. So if people don't use the lung clearing formula, then their fever tends to persist more than 2 days. So after Tongfu, which means that we can get the stool out of the patient, then the next step is to dissolve the dampness in the patient. And if the fever persists in the patients after the second formula, we will use 清热, which means clear the heat from the body of the patient. So in the 340 patients that we have in Shanghai, over 90% of patients receive TCM treatment. And in Shanghai, we had all 3 special drugs that we use. One is Jingyin granule, and the second one is Liu Shen pill, and the third one is Tan Re Qing, either in capsule form or injection fluid form. So these are some of the drugs that we used in Shanghai, which we had written some report on the efficacy of those drugs. The next page. Okay, so this is a case study. So this is a female patient, 65 years old, and then she had a persisting fever for 9 days. So usually at this point is when a patient becomes in critical condition. So we really gave her all kinds of treatment plans, but it didn't really work. So after 9 days of persisting fever, we used TCM on the 10th day, and then within 2 days, her fever was subdued. So we gave her a comprehensive support treatment, including oxygen inhalation, antiviral, anti-infection, but nothing really worked. However, for 9 days, her fever didn't go away. So finally, on the 10th day, we gave her TCM. So you can see that. So on the 3rd day, her body temperature actually resumed back to normal levels. And so this is a very successful case study we had, and we included in our research article. Let's move on to the next one. You can see these are the chest CT images. The first one is on the 10th of February, the middle one's the 13th, and the third one is on the 24th of February. Then you can see that she on the third imaging, she had very great improvement in her lungs, which means that the TCM treatment plan really had a great effect in treating the viruses in her body. So we had quite a few cases like that. So we really saved a lot of patients from turning into critical cases. So which kind of inspired us to start TCM intervention earlier in the progression of the disease. You can see. So this is the second case which we can look at his tongue coating, which turns much better on the 3rd day. So you can also see the prescription we gave him. So you can see a lot of the prescription we given, and his conditions also didn't exacerbate with TCM intervention. This is the use of TCM in our clinical use. Like we said, over 90% of patients received a combination of West medicine, decoction, and Chinese patent drugs. And because the coverage of TCM is so high in patients, the death rate of Shanghai COVID-19 patients was only around 1%. And the conversion rate is only 6.5% of patients that went from severe to critical, which means that most of the patients actually got much better. So we can see that if we use a syndrome analysis on 282 cases, we have 64 Wei-Fen syndrome, 166 Qi-Fen syndrome. Infant syndrome takes up 54 cases, and Xue-Fen, we don't have any Xue-Fen cases. You can see that like 15% of the patients had a case of equal amount of dampness and heat in their body. But at the same time, over 57% of the cases have more heat than dampness in their body. So among the patients, So among the 332 patients treated with TCM, there are 68 patients whose data was missing, so they were excluded. So the average hospitalizations period was 17 days for these patients. And the throat swab nucleic acid testing results turned negative in 9 days on average, and the stool NAT result turned negative in around 10 days. So in average, the shortest the period of fever was 3.4 days, and the shortest period was 1 day for the patient's fever to subside. So with the total coverage of TCM in the treatment plan in Shanghai right now, we don't have any severe cases anymore in Shanghai. So we had 3 conclusions from our research. Is that early intervention of TCM, we found out that if we intervene, if we use TCM on the patients within 3 days, we can turn their NAT result into a negative very soon. And so early intervention is key. And especially if we use Da Huang, we can see the same results in subsiding the fever and also alleviating their symptoms. And so there is a side effect, and in taking about 3/4 of the patients after taking Da Huang tend to have diarrhea. And the first one is Tanreling capsules, which has a lot of efficiency. Also, Shufeng Jiedu capsule has also a positive impact in alleviating symptoms. And the final conclusion is that the TCM has an effect on the blood coagulation, inflammation, and immunity. So we have done a lot of effects analyses on all these aspects. So we have published some articles. If you're interested, you can go online and find our research results. So in conclusion, so there are advantages to both TCM and Western medicine in treating COVID-19, and I think the 2 schools of medicine really complement each other. And so in terms of the advantages, Chinese medicine and Western medicine have different ways of treating the patients, and there are areas that they work better than the other. And also, early intervention is key. If we can give the patients TCM early, we can subdue fever, improve conditions, and the organ and intestinal function much better. And also stop the disease from progressing. And another conclusion is that it's never too early or too late to improve the Tongfu, to improve the lung function and intestinal functions. And another thing is 疏利透达, which means to unblock the meridians in the body. And it can really have a holistic theory on how we should look at the channel systems throughout the body. And also in Shanghai, within 24 hours, as COVID-19 patients can definitely receive some form of TCM treatment. So, and because of that, right now we don't really have any severe or critical cases anymore, and most patients can be discharged within 3 or 4 days. And also we don't have any patients that have been discharged and tested positive again, which is a very good thing. So I think as we deepen our understanding of this disease, we can work together and control it better. So I think for TCM researchers and doctors, we want to work quickly to give us our results and our experiences to help all of us. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zhang, for your speech. So Professor Zhang really talked about the experience and the insights from the perspective of Shanghainese doctors. 通腑化之清热 all. I think your kind of insights are slightly different from the national perspective on how to treat the disease. So I think you really have your advantages and characteristics in how you approach this. So are there any questions from online?
Any questions online? We have the time to take one. Oh, I think plenty of questions online just pumped out in the Q&A session. So it's a very practical talking. So probably a lot of the questions online now is available. One posted by Hong Kong U PhD Chen Jianping. Is there any confirmation that now we confirmed it is effective in animal trial? Why, if it's effective in vitro but not effective in vivo, can we move to the clinical trial? Another is the compound formula. What kind of the protein we should target to? Probably, I guess this question is to the previous speaker. I think these two questions are to Professor Li Hua, because Professor Li Hua, we was in a kind of rush. So after recovery, after the recovery, do they have the after effects like the depression? So far, no. But from those recovered from the severe conditions, in the next 2 to 3 months, we did some retrospective studies and researchers. We haven't found any concrete after effects or follow-up diseases or conditions. The last question from Mr. Chen. Thanks for your marvelous presentation. So what's your suggestion for prevention of COVID? COVID prevention, wearing mask. So this is the major way of preventing. In Chinese traditional medicine term, we means blocking the pathogens or blocking the evil things. So if you don't have this blockage, so you will be very suspective and vulnerable to those pathogens. Last question: do you have a formula to treat the loss of the sense of the taste? 7 of them, when we did the study, that 7 from 8 patients that lost their sense of taste. We have some TCM that trigger or open up the sinuses cells and the sinuses organs. Because the sample size is quite small, so we haven't concluded a very concrete sound practices. But even the most severe condition recovered fully afterwards, so no one suffered from the really long-lasting after effects. So as the interest of time, we just wrap up the Q&A session, and thanks very much for Mr. Zhang Wei for your presentation. See you.
All right. Next up is the last speaker is the potential targets for treatment of coronavirus COVID-19, a review of Qing-Fei-Pai-Du decoction and its major ingredients. All right. Before her speech, I will give a brief introduction of her. So she studied from 2002 to 2003 and obtained the Bachelor of Medicine and Master of Clinical Medicine at Shanghai University of Traditional Medicine. And she obtained her doctorate degree in Chinese medicine research at the University of Hong Kong. And so she mainly specialized in clinical studies. Right now, she works at the clinical division at the Hong Kong Baptist University, and she has published She has published more than 60 articles in international journals, and acted as an investigator for more than 20 clinical research projects. Okay. Thank you, moderators. I'm very happy that I can have this opportunity to share with you our research, and also to see a review of TCM in the treatment of COVID-19. So I have a few. I'm gonna give you a background. We can see that COVID-19 is a worse pandemic outbreak than SARS back in 2009. So at the moment, for clinical researchers like us, and as well as basic science. So for researchers like us, right now we are only treating the symptoms, but not treating the virus. Right now, all the clinical researches are still in progress. And so we use a lot of old recipes and to use it for this new disease. And I know that in Dongzhimen Hospital, so we had a lot of they have published a lot of articles on their research. So right now we need to look at right now our focus on how to alleviate the symptoms and shorten the period of their hospitalization. So earlier we have looked at a lot of basic science and predictions and experience from other researchers and doctors. So obviously the first focus is prevention, and the second is the control of the symptoms, especially to stop it from exacerbating. For TCM, because we take a very holistic, preventive view, so we want to explore ways to provide prevention, treatment, and rehabilitative care to patients. So in TCM, we talk about 扶正and 趋贤. So how does that apply to COVID-19? So I think So I think based on that theory, we think boost immunity is the most important and most effective thing in treating COVID-19. So I think TCM compounds are not necessarily more effective in antiviral effects. But in terms of alleviating symptoms, it's much better for than Western medicines. So in Chinese medicine, COVID-19 is a plague. Now, but based on different regions of China, the plague manifests itself in very different ways. For example, in northern areas of China, the plague manifests itself as a damp cold, but in the southern areas, it's damp heat and dampness and toxins. And so we have a lot of, so it can manifest itself in the patient's body. So they will have very different symptoms such as fever and fatigue and body aches. And as we earlier talked about, lack of smell or taste, these all can be treated by TCM. So later I'll talk about Qing-Fei-Pai-Du detection, but right now, so during the observational period, we can use some preventative medicines such as Huazhong Zhong in both in pill and liquid form. And then the next stage is the positive cases or confirmed cases. Depending on the different stages of their disease, we can use very individualized treatment plans using herbal medicine and acupuncture. And during the rehabilitation period, which means that we're dealing with recovered patients, we have to boost their nutrition and their immunity to treat the lung-spleen qi deficiency and deficiency in both the qi and yin patterns. So right now we are doing a lot of research in rehabilitation period, but I think other universities are also doing. We're also doing a lot of work on other periods, both observational period and treatment period. Now, so in Hong Kong at Hong Kong BU, we will distribute Chinese medicine, especially like immunity enhancement remedy, to the elderly community and patients with chronic illnesses. So actually, the formula of this remedy was formed by a group of experts, and we actually consulted a lot of specialists from across China. So these remedies focus on boosting the yin in patients' bodies, so to boost their health and immunity levels. The second part of my presentation is about symptom-based treatments. So the use of TCM actually had a great impact on our control and treatment of COVID-19 in China. So in Zhong Mobile Cabinet Hospital is the only hospital that was taken over by the TCM team, actually. So I actually talked to one of the doctors, and they told us that so for mild and moderate cases, they use the TCM TCM only treatment plan. And for severe and critical cases, they will add some form of Western medical intervention. So 71% of the patients they took was mild patients, So they only had some coughing and fever and didn't have any pneumonia. So, and then 29% of the patients had some mild form of pneumonia or moderate symptoms, but they didn't have like shortness of breath or very severe conditions. So for those patients, TCM intervention really yielded a lot of positive results. So there are a lot of medical literature that have reviewed the plausible mechanism of Chinese medicine. So there are 5 aspects that they've been looking at. One is antiviral, and the other one is the cytokine storm prevention, and also antioxidative activities and immune modulation. And the 5th one is the ACE2 receptor binding effect. But the binding effect is more a prediction and more of a preliminary research, so it needs more research and material results for it to be convincing. So what are the recommended CM formulas by the state? So let's look at Qing-Fei-Pai-Du-Tang. For us, in the 2 weeks in mid to late March, we did a very large scale article on our research of Qing-Fei-Pai-Du decoction and its major herbs, and we actually had a few participants from the United States that helped with the research report as well. Qing-Fei-Pai-Du decoction is not a new thing. It's actually composes 5 classic formulas, and we call it a very universal formula, which means that it's very good for most mild to moderate COVID patients. I think everybody is very familiar with Shanghai formula. So, 大青龙 decoction is 麻杏石甘汤's variation. So all those 5 classic formulations have some kind of similarities and differences with each other, and they can. So actually in China, this has been Qing-Fei-Pai-Du decoction has been administered to 1,300 patients. And so it looks very promising right now, because none of the patients had to ended up in ICU, and none of them were on ventilators. So for us, the mechanism of action of Qing-Fei-Pai-Du decoction is actually still unclear, because it had so many different components interacting with each other and working in different ways. So we did some systematic search based on both Chinese and English databases, and the result was that we saw some ingredients had antiviral effect. For example, 麻黄、柴胡、广藿香、惠枝、猪苓、甘草, and 黄芩. So that's the 3 herbs in the Qing-Fei-Pai-Du decoction that helps with antiviral effect. And at the same time, 麻黄、广藿香、谷杏苓、白枝、茯苓, licorice 桂枝. So these are the herbs, these 9 herbs that's good at boosting spleen function and boost immunity. And antioxidative activity is 茯苓, 黄芩, and 麻黄, 3 effects. And for the binding effect of ACE2, so based on the effect was found through a network pharmacology analysis. So we found 7 herbs: ma huang, huangqing, guanghuoxiang, and etc. So if you're interested, you can find the previous article I posted in the previous page for detail. So you can see that. So these are actually the Latin names for all the herbs that I mentioned. You can see 柴胡、广藿香、黄芩、茯苓、猪苓、鸡心、紫苑. So these are the 9 major ingredients that's the most effective from the compounds, and all the other ones are actually complementary ingredients. So by reacting to each other and complementing each other, they had 4 major effects. So network pharmacology is a method that we can use for prediction and for combing through the database. Next up, we have Professor Lin, Professor Dong. So all of us got together the HA-led special Chinese medicine outpatient program. So this is a rehabilitation program. So focusing on discharge the COVID-19 patients who already have been tested negative. This is a very individualized and TCM-centric plan. So we will be retrospectively examining the body constitution before the patients were diagnosed with COVID-19. And the second step was to figure out the major clinical symptoms and syndrome diagnosis of this patient before they were discharged. And finally, we evaluate the therapeutic effects based on the individualized treatment. So this is a multi-centered study that involves 7 medical centers. So we do a lot of research training and support from the university side. And we also do help with data analysis and report and manuscript drafting. So we had 150 participants who were infected with COVID-19. So the retrospective syndrome survey involved a questionnaire that we made. It's called a body constitutions questionnaire, and another one is the clinical guidelines published in China, as well as symptoms listed in the CDC's website. So basically, after 3 months of treatment, the patients can choose whether to continue with another 3 months treatment or enter into like a follow-up period. So this is not a mandatory method, but this is more like a recommendation. So to find out that what kind of clinical symptoms the patients have, to see whether they have lung and spleen qi deficiency syndrome or Qi deficiency syndrome. So then based on which syndrome they have, we can offer individualized treatment plan. So the outcome measures, because it's an individualized treatment plan, so the primary indicator is the changes of the patient's health, characterized by Chinese medicine patterns and clinical characteristics. And other outcomes we're looking at is the lung function assessments and quality of life, as well as body constitution. So next up, I will be talking about some of the future works we want to conduct. So obviously in Hong Kong, we want to promote available clinical services. We really want to promote services in terms of prevention, treatment, and rehabilitation, as well as using real-life cases, and as well as recovered patients. So in Hong Kong, we have some of those, so we really want to get in contact with them and get some data from them. And also, we really want the government to give us more opportunities to kind of conduct our work and also share the results of our work. So this is my report. Thank you, HA and 3 universities, as well as Lin Zhishou and Huangtan Zhiyuan and Huangbo, Luo Yi, Chen Haiyong, for all your support. So this is my report. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zhong. So Dr. Zhong talked about Qing-Fei-Pai-Du decoction and did an analysis on it from the of using network pharmacology, and also found 4 major effects of this decoction and how it worked. I think network pharmacology is all the rage right now. So, and I think your research is really cutting edge. And also you talked about the TCM treatment program on recovered COVID-19 patients. And this is conducted by the university and HA. So I think right now we don't have a lot of those recovered patients in Hong Kong. So are there any questions for Dr. Zhong? There are 3 questions. The first one is, was it possible that Chinese medicine could be used as the first-line treatment in COVID-19? So can the Chinese medicine be used in the front line? This is from Mr. Yuan Longzhang, the question for Mr. Yuan. So I guess he's asking whether TCM can be used as a frontline treatment drug for COVID-19. Well, I think in Hong Kong, we don't have first-hand data on this because we are not involved in frontline treatment. But in mainland China, and for what we learned from our colleagues in Beijing and Wuhan and Shanghai, and also our online discussions, what I know is that because right now we have mild, moderate, severe, and critical patients. Now for mild and moderate patients, they are all treated with TCM plan. So basically they have fever, they're coughing, but they don't have pneumonia. And even for severe patients, a lot of them don't have shortness of breath. So for all those patients in mainland China, all of those patients are receiving a TCM treatment plan. And the Western medicine is just a complementary plan for those patients. And another question is, for the early symptoms for COVID-19, for example, losing of taste and smell, so are there any methods to treat those symptoms? So from what I learned from the TCM doctors working from the front line, and from their the program and research they've done. So from what we've learned so far is that the recovery of smell is faster than the recovery of smell. for some patients, it takes them a very long time to have their sense of taste back. But we found out that using Chinese acupuncture therapy actually has some effectiveness on this. So, but again, we have not done any clinical researches on this, so we can delve into this more. So we're at the end of the day, so there are only 2 more questions. So let's get them done. So again, I want to stress that I don't have first-hand data. So all I know is from my discussion from my frontline colleagues. So there's a question from Jenny. So I think there is a remedy, like a preventative remedy that Hong Kong BU is introducing. So can you do more in terms of preventative remedies? I think that right now we are still in using the standards as a service instead of a treatment. For example, we focus on senior citizens age 65 or more, or for example, medical personnel or the staff in nursing homes. So those people are really worried that they're very exposed to the virus. So in our research, like, we really focus on the aspects of boosting immunity for these people. So the last question is from Ms. Xu Yanhua. So in Hong Kong, was TCM involved in the treatment of COVID-19 patients? Not in inpatient patients, because they're all in quarantined rooms, so we're not involved. So this is the end of today's conference. So we had 4 speakers this afternoon. One is Professor Lin and Professor Zhang Wei and Professor Lin Hua and Dr. Zhong from Hong Kong BU. So all 4 of them focus on a different aspect on the treatment and prevention and the TCM use in COVID-19. And they talked about the establishing. So they're talking. So people talked about the bioactive nature compounds and the clinical research, therapeutic target research, as well as specific TCM drugs. So thank you, everyone.